Hi, this is Joyce Polino Crane, and I am the news director at WestfordCAT. Today, I'm interviewing Marian Harman, who has been writing a wildlife column for the Eagle Independent and the Conservation Trust website for, I don't know, umpteen years. Marian, how long?
30 years.
For 30 years. Welcome to my humble interview session. We're here to talk about birds because I had the wonderful experience this summer of watching fledglings grow inside a nest right outside the front door, and went on vacation and the nest was empty. So I feel like hopefully Mother Bird got them going and everything was fine and they're flying and happy now. But I called you to ask you about this situation and what I should do about it while they were still growing. And you gave me a lot of good advice. Tell me what you would say. Tell me what you think of this situation and about birding in general, because you really are a birder.
About the nesting, there are two species of birds that I know of in this area that tend to nest in hanging baskets of flowers, which is your case, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Or in a wreath that's on your door. And those species are the house finch. The male has got quite a bit of red on him, on his back, his tail, above his tail, his head, his breast. And the female is completely brown, stripy. And they have the big, thick finch beak. So those really love to nest in hanging nests and wreaths. And the other is the Carolina wren, which is a very cute, pert little bird, brown also, both male and female. And they make a sort of an oven-shaped nest with a hole in the side, and they put that often in a hanging basket or a wreath. And so people don't know what to do about it because they're going back and forth in and out their door or next to their door, and the birds are flushing, in other words, flying out of the nest every time they go by, and they worry about that. Normally the birds handle that situation very well. And as long as you don't have a tremendous amount of disruption, good to use another door if you can, or just minimize your disruption at your door if you want to keep them going there. It's okay if you don't want to keep them going. You know they will re-nest, most likely.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Many birds re-nest several times, a year. So if they lose their first brood, first batch of eggs, they'll often find a better place, and they'll build another nest, and they'll abandon the eggs. But once the babies are hatched out of those eggs, they will not abandon the nest under any circumstances, unless they are injured or killed somehow. But the parents will take care of those babies as long as they're alive.
Is that every species the same?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Once the babies are hatched, the parents are completely invested. And so that's good to know that, if it's just eggs, then they probably will be okay and they'll probably re-nest. But if it's babies, you're kind of stuck with with the nest. And that's okay.
I worried like a mother over them.
Yeah.
And I was feeling like if they die, it's my fault.
Yeah.
But
that's a very kind heart. That's great.
I did worry that the ones underneath would not get air to breathe, like that they'd be suffocated. They were really cramped in there.
Well, if they're that big, that they're cramped in there, they're, That's fine. That'll keep them warm, keep them dry, whatever. Parents know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They don't build a nest that's too large or too small. And once the babies are big enough, they'll hop up on the edge of the nest and they'll exercise their wings, and then they're almost ready to go. And usually it's like between 2 and 3 weeks between hatching and fledging, which is flying out of the nest. And once they've flown out of the nest, they won't come back to it.
Oh,
So,
that's my next question. That's interesting.
Yeah. So they're out for good. And the parents will feed them wherever they are, wherever they land, the ground or a bush or wherever they end up, the parents will feed them.
At what age are they ready to go? Like, is it 6 months after hatching or 1 year after hatching?
Well, they're considered adults very quickly. The parents will start to re-nest if they're going to after about 2 weeks of feeding the babies out of the nest. The babies by then have learned to feed themselves.
Mhm.
And if they're not quite ready, one parent will start a new nest and the other will keep feeding, but pretty quickly, a couple of weeks. Yeah.
So birding is very intriguing, and you've been doing this for some 30 years.
Yeah.
What got you interested in the beginning?
I've always loved birds, and ever since I was a little kid, my mom put a bird feeder outside my bedroom window, and I had a year in which I was ill and I had to stay in bed. I don't know if they would do it that way now, but anyway, I was supposed to stay in bed for a year when I was 6 years old, which
Wow.
I can imagine what my mother had to put up with to make that happen. But anyway, she put a bird feeder outside the window, which was great. And we would all watch it. And we named the birds, and we looked for which ones came every day and all of that. And that was tremendously helpful to me in that situation. And so I think that's why I learned to love birds. So, and my grandparents used to do some birding too, when I would see them in the summer. So that was the love of it. And I think that has to come first. I think children who grow up loving wild animals, having pets is important. Mm-hmm. To know that animals have feelings and animals have rights, not to be whacked or not to be picked up backwards and so on and so forth. And you teach your children that when they have pets. Mm-hmm. And then they learn to love wild animals because they realize that they are also sentient feeling creatures. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a great thing is to raise children that way and have a bird feeder and talk about the birds. Look at the birds when you're walking in nature, things like that. Even if you don't know their name, you can just say, look at that beautiful red bird, or, and that will make all the difference with children. So we did a lot of informal sort of that kind of thing as I was growing up. And then I got more serious about birding as I got my own house and my own bird feeders, and thought, well, I really want to learn these birds. And I think one of the best way to learn birds, of course, you learn them by looking at them and looking at their colors and their size and so on and so forth with your birding field guide. Nowadays, of course, you can do it on your iPhone, but this is my favorite field guide, Sibley, the Sibley book, field guide to birds of Eastern North America. And then this one is Peterson. Many people start with this one because it's a little bit simpler and very good. So you do learn to look at the birds at your feeder and identify them. But the more efficient way, actually, when you're walking, because birds are hard to see, they're behind leaves, they're on the top of trees, they move a lot. The best way, I think, to learn birds is to learn the bird songs. And or calls. And if you hear them as you're walking, then you'll know that a cardinal is in the top of that tree, because you know the cardinal songs. And then you can look for it, and it's easier that way. So I learned to bird by ear with these CDs. This is
Oh, yeah.
birding by ear, and then later they came out with one with a little more complex bird songs called More Birding by Ear. And this is Richard Walton and Robert Lawson. I have not found that any other birding CDs are good. These are really good, because what he does here is he gives you mnemonic devices to remember. So when you hear the song, you think, oh, witchety, witchety, witchety. Well, oh, that's a common yellowthroat.
That's great.
And what I do is I think of a witch, you know, because the common yellowthroat has a black mask. And so I know when I hear witchety, witchety, then that reminds me of witches and the black mask, and I know what the bird is. And I may not see the bird, you know, I may not be able to see it. It may be completely camouflaged, but I know that it's there.
Mhm.
So that's what's fun when you're walking, is to make a list. You know, I'm constantly, I have a notebook here, and I'm constantly writing down. You can also record in your iPhone, you know, all the birds you see when you're walking, and where you were, and what time of year it was, and so on and so forth. And that's interesting to look back on later, especially when I'm writing my columns. Then I know when did the juncos arrive, and when did they leave. Juncos are birds that come here in the winter, and they're not here in the summer. So it's always interesting to know when they come and when they leave. In noting those things down, and I know a lot of other people do that in town, they send me reports, and it's great to hear from other people in town, and to hear not only what they saw and how many they saw, but a little bit about the behavior. And like Joyce's birds that were nesting right next to her door in the hanging plant. And, you know, it's just very interesting. I mean, that's how I know that those two species do that, because people report them. And so it's, I can jot down, people send usually by email these days, or you can call me or write me a note. But you know, then I have the reports for the month, and I can write my article as well as my own observations. And I write an article about something to do with what's happening that month. Not always with birds, sometimes with mammals and plants, but mostly birds is what people are interested in. So
well, we've had a variety of different animals show up around Westford. There's been a what is it? The bobcat.
bobcat. Yeah.
Bobcats have shown, and turtles and salamanders. But birds have been probably your mainstay with your column, which I should explain to those who've never seen it. It's a full page of content, usually. Very, you know, people really do connect with you and send in these, you know, sightings of animals, of any animals. And it's fascinating to read, and it's a wonderful historic piece of content that really, really, you know, hopefully people are listening and will preserve those columns.
Yes, yes. I have notebooks and notebooks full of full of those columns. And fortunately, the Westford Conservation Trust, of which I am a member, it's a nonprofit conservation organization here in town. And fortunately, they are now printing my articles and year-end reviews and things like that. And that will be probably a better archive than anything I can do. So you can go online. You can go to westfordconservationtrust.org and look up all kinds of things. And one of the things is wildlife sightings, and my articles are there. You can look up trails. All the trails that are documented are on that website. Different articles, different trail walks, different things that the trust offers. And the trust always needs volunteers and always needs help. So yeah, do go on that website, and you can find a wealth of information about conservation in Westford.
Speaking of conservation, did you and your husband Bill, were you the starters of that trust? Did you found it?
Yes, we did. Yeah, along with some other people. We had a nice group that was sort of a combination of a conservation group and an agricultural preservation group.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just an informal group at the time. We worked on trails, we worked on agriculture, and then we decided to become officially a land trust. And you have to go through the process of becoming incorporated as a nonprofit. So we were fortunate to have a volunteer lawyer to help us go through that process. Wasn't too difficult.
Mm-hmm. And
then we had set up a land trust, and almost every town in Massachusetts has a land trust. And that's because, you know, the town itself could buy land and preserve it. The Conservation Commission would normally be the vehicle for that, and administer conservation land. And Westford has a lot of conservation land administered by the Conservation Commission. But sometimes it's good to have a private organization that can come in and purchase land or receive a gift of land.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our trust land is gifted to the trust by people who just want to save it. They don't want to see it ever built on.
Like you and Bill, because you made a donation of land.
We did, yes. Right now we live in a condo, Pilgrim Village, which is very nice, and lots of trails and beautiful woods and a lake. So it's very, very nice. But for most of the time we've lived in Westford, we lived on Chamberlain Road in an old house with quite a bit of land. And so we were able to donate some of that land to the trust, and or put some conservation restriction on some of those lands. So that was great, because now we knew when we sold our house that it wasn't going to become a subdivision, and it could have become very easily a subdivision. So
land, because
yeah, so we feel good. You know, our animals and birds that we had there are protected, at least to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
understandable. I do want to mention, I remember the story about the horses that you had there in the early years.
Yes.
I forget their names, but I do remember.
We had many horses over the years.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, up to 5 at a time. And we started out with our exploration of Westford's open spaces and trails on horseback. And we moved there in order to have horses, because we had a barn and we had some land. And so we had a wonderful, many wonderful years riding our horses on the trails in Westford that existed at that time in the open spaces. But we saw over the years that many of those trails and open spaces really weren't protected. They were private property, and you know, we were so young at the time, we didn't really know. But you know, all of a sudden, our favorite riding areas were being developed, and they weren't there anymore, and you couldn't ride through this whole area anymore. And that's when we started the Conservation Trust, because we thought, we've got to get active in trying to protect some of these trails and land. So that's how that came about.
That's a good story, one worth preserving as well.
Yeah.
So I don't have much more to ask of you today, but is there anything any final words you'd like to offer Westford residents before we go?
Well, I would say that as many people this year found out or discovered, we have fabulous trails and open spaces in Westford. And there's something like 70 trails, protected trails, and lots of acres of protected land. We can always use more, but people have been going out because of COVID and quarantine restrictions, needing to get out of the house, and people have been discovering the open spaces and trails in Westford. So there's been a big upsurge of interest in, and I think and hope in protecting these areas. Birding is just one way to enjoy it. There's many ways to enjoy just walking with a goal in mind of getting fit, and walking up to your limit, your ability, see how far you can walk, how fast you can walk. But I prefer to, what Thoreau used to call, saunter. And partly because I'm getting older and creaky in the joints, but I walk slowly. I tend to walk either alone or with other people who want to be in the moment. I don't like to be thinking about other things or worrying about things when I'm out in nature. So I find it extremely therapeutic. And with my binoculars in hand and my handy cell phone that has the app on it for Sibley birds, then I can go out and see what's happening. And I never fail to have the gift of a surprise in nature. Even if I walk the same trail every day and I tend to walk often the same trail, I'll always see something new. And if I see a new plant, I like plants as well very much. Wildflowers. I'm not a gardener. I love wildflowers and wild plants. And when I see a new one, to me, I have my plant book, and I also have iNaturalist on the phone, and I can then sit down or stay near that plant until I've identified it. And it's easy enough to do in the field. And maybe I write it down, maybe I don't, but once I've identified it 3 or 4 times, I know what it is. So I just remember it. So that's also a lot of fun, because as the seasons change, the birds change, the types of birds we have here change, and the plants that are blooming are different. So it's a wonderful therapeutic walking meditation, really. And I pretty much like to just have it be a quiet time for myself or fellow birder, someone else who is as interested in these things as I am, rather than, a social, it's wonderful to walk in a group, a social group, but that's a different kind of a walk completely than what I'm talking about. This is more akin to, the Japanese idea of forest bathing. I don't exactly do forest bathing, but it's very akin to that.
Are they actually bathing? What does that word mean?
No, they're finding a sit spot that they love in the forest, and just sitting and letting all of the smells, sounds, feel of the wind, that sort of thing, just wash over them.
So it's a
And
natural immersement.
yeah, and it's an individual thing that you do by yourself, or if you're with a group, you separate out, sort of a guided um, thing sometimes. But, I like to sit and do that too, but I like to keep moving slowly and seeing what is new today. There's always something new. And so it's akin to that. It's like a meditation.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I hope to run into you on those trails someday.
Thank you. Yeah, good idea.
So for today, we're going to sign off, but I would like to invite you back sometime this summer, and we can maybe talk a little more about wildlife in Westford if you like.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much, Marian, Harman. This is Joyce Polino Crane for WestfordCAT.